So Recharge is very pleased to invite you. Recharge is a leading industry voice on the advanced rechargeable and lithium batteries value chain in Europe. Our mission is to promote advanced rechargeable batteries as a key technology to contribute to a more empowered and sustainable circular economy. We represent the full value chain from supplier and of primary and secondary raw materials to battery equipment, original manufacturer, and logistics partners and battery recyclers. So this last session of Batteries for Europe Roundtable, the fourth this year, is entitled The Last Stretch, Securing a Responsible and Leading European Battery Sector. As you know, almost 1 year after the European Commission published their long-awaited proposal for these modernized battery rules in Europe, we are now at a crucial stage for establishing a fit-for-purpose regulation, translating this European batteries vision into a meaningful legislative framework. Today, the target is to discuss viable solutions and measures to boost responsible and leading European battery sector in the future. We will focus on European value chain competitiveness and sustainability and how these two characteristics or criteria need to go hand in hand. The battery sector's contribution to achieving the European climate objective and setting sustainability standards globally will be dependent on a fit-for-purpose batteries regulation, and that's what we will talk about. So it's a big honor today to have a number of speakers with us. First of all, we will have Mr. MEP Ismail Ertug, which I am following now, it seems has not joined yet. Then we have also a talk from Mr. MEP Antonius Manders, rapporteur of the IMCO committee. He couldn't join the roundtable, but we are pleased to share with you a video message that will be shown during the second session. We also are welcoming Mr. Juni Nissinen, senior specialist at the Ministry of the Environment of Finland. Thank you for joining us. Mrs. Emma Vunolte, environmental counselor from the permanent representation of Sweden to the Europe. Welcome also. We then have Mr. Adli Manseri, which is counselor for the environment for the Belgium representative permanent representation to the Europe. Welcome, thanks for joining. And from the Commission side, we have Mr. Mattia Pel, head of the unit at DG Environment European Commission, and Mr. James Copping, Policy Officer Mobility at DG Grow at the European Commission as well. Thank you all for joining us. On the industry side, we will have some Recharge members, of course. First of all, Mr. Patrick Demetz, our chairman and at Recharge and Corporate Government and Environmental Affairs Directors for Saft, a French battery manufacturer. Then we have Mrs. Migle Bluzevice, which is Senior Manager Mobility Advocacy Industry Affairs at BASF, the German multinational company. Then we have Ms. Sophie Tricot, which is Director of Communication, Sustainability and Public Affairs at 4C Power, also a French battery manufacturer. We have Mr. Jan Tigdat, Director of Governmental Affairs for European Benelux from Umicore, the Belgian multinational for materials, particularly battery materials producers and recycler. And finally, Mr. Sebastian Roller, which is Manager Product Compliance at Varta Microbattery, a German battery manufacturer. So I'm very much looking forward to the two sessions of today. We will have two parts. First part is creating a circular economy in the Europe. And the second one will creating a strong European battery industry, which we hope and will help clarifying how both concepts are certainly linked. A few housekeeping rules, as you can read here. We will make this very short. Please don't hesitate to share your thought on the hashtag Batteries for Europe or Twitter Recharge for Europe, Recharge Europe. And you can find, of course, more information on our website or contact us on our mail. And then checking if we have Mr. Ismail Ertug seems has not joined yet. It seems Mr. Ertug is a bit late. to join us today, or maybe have some difficulties. So maybe we will just then change the order of the presentation. And therefore, I would like to invite then directly Mr. Adli Manseri, the Belgium representative, to exchange his view on this circular economy for the European battery industry. Mr. Manseri, I hope you can hear me. Yes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Mr. Chanson. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having invited me to participate in this panel and allowing us to address a very interesting, albeit complex issue of the battery ecosystem. Before I start, I must warn you that I will not be able to present Belgium's full position at this stage. We are still, of course, in the process of internal coordination. So please, what I will say can therefore be in no way considered as the official position of Belgium. But now that little disclaimer is done, let's discuss about the circularity. Circularity as a transition from a purely linear economic model is only an objective that has been set at the European level, but also more globally in the world. So we must therefore provide the means, financial, scientific, but also the technologies to achieve it. But more importantly, to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past or promoting a regrettable alternative, we need to lay the ground rules. And with your permission, and given the time available, I propose to approach it from three angles. Circularity in relation to resource efficiency, also linked to the EU strategic autonomy, circularity and safety, and finally, circularity and sustainability. We know, and it's no longer debated, that batteries are essential to ensure our green transition and to enable us to achieve the climate objectives that we have set ourselves. However, electrification depends on critical materials, the majority of which we depend on from other parts of the world. The Commission has proposed a number of measures, including due diligence to minimize the environmental pressure of the EU, increased collection requirements, and also recycling efficiency, and the setting of recycled material targets. All these measures should be seen as a coherent package to promote both the establishment of a sustainable market for secondary materials and to ensure that Europe can become as self-sufficient as possible, notably in the view of the forecast increase in the use of certain minerals, such as the lithium. Ambition can be used as a lever to ensure that we point the way forward for our industrial fabric, but also to give them a clear and predictable framework. It is not the best way to attract long-term investment? The question is raised. Circularity should, nevertheless, never be a reason to endanger either our health or our environment. Therefore, the restriction process is an important part of this specific type of legislation, in particular to ensure that the most dangerous substances are no longer used, or if they are used, in a sound manner. Nevertheless, we are convinced that the process provided for in the REACH regulation is the best tool, so good that the Commission is more than strongly inspired by it. However, in order to ensure coherence and legal certainty for both economic operators and public authorities, we believe that only the REACH regulation should remain the key instrument. Ensuring a level playing field for both primary and secondary materials in all sectors and ensuring that open loops are possible can only be achieved through legal certainty. And legal certainty means a single, clear, and future-proofed instrument. Therefore, the Annex 17 of REACH, although we can still improve the restriction process, of course, but this annex seems to us to be the perfect instrument. Let us avoid duplication of processes, potential inconsistencies, and uncertainties linked to the multiplication of instruments to be mobilized for a single product. Reducing the administrative burden also requires legal simplification. Finally, we cannot succeed in achieving a European circular economy model if we only think at the end of the road. Thus, the idea of developing sustainability and safety criteria, the sustainable and safe criteria mobilized by the Commission, notably within the chemical strategy, are essential for us. In this way, we must find ways, hand in hand with public authorities, academia, policy makers, industry, and investors to produce European batteries that are as efficient and long-lasting as possible and with least environmental and health impacts, thus ensuring that we meet our climate targets. Of course, it's quite complex to present a complete vision in such a short time. And so I will be delighted to hear from you what could be the obstacles, but also the opportunities that you have identified within that regulation, but also in the sectorial battery ecosystem. I look forward to discussing this further afterwards and remain at your disposal for any further information. Mr. Jensen, thank you once again, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much for this nice introduction. And I will certainly come back to you with some questions or potentially comment during the panel session. Okay, then without further delay, I see Mr. Pellegrini is with us. I hope you can hear us, and I will then hand over to you to provide us with some view of the European Commission on these batteries and circular economy. Mr. Pellegrini, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, and good afternoon, everybody. Indeed, our proposal now sometimes has passed. It was adopted in December of 2020. In the meanwhile, we have been busy in the unit with many other files, and on the one side, negotiating batteries, on the other side, continue to produce a legislative revision. I think we did 3 legislative revisions in 10 months, because we adopted also the POPs regulation and the waste shipment regulation. That gives you an idea of what is happening with the Green Deal, and we have plenty of them in the pipeline. But of course, batteries has been the front runner, and I would like to start with that. I mean, what we have done in the batteries regulation is really changing the overall philosophy of legislation in the field of circular economy, because until now, if you look at all our directives, they were focusing only on the end of life of the products. So they were focusing on the waste management of the products. And with the batteries regulation, is actually a prototype of the future sustainable product initiative, because essentially what we have done, we have regulated not only the end of life of a product, but also the placing into the market of a product. What are the sustainability requirements which needs to be respected? I always give a very easy example. I always consider that Chapter 2 and Chapter 7 of the batteries regulation can be seen as the 2 legs on which you are working every day. Of course, there are many other chapters which are important, but Chapter 2 and Chapter 7 are really the core of this proposal. On the one side, Chapter 2 is regulating the sustainability requirements. On the other side, the Chapter 7 is regulating the end of life of the products. And from that point of view, indeed, as you know, there are many sustainability requirements. My colleague Adil was mentioning, indeed, one example is the substances of concern or hazardous substances, which is Article 6 of the proposal, where our view was that this can be done with an independent procedure, but having the European Chemical Agency in charge. Some of the member states are now pushing for bringing everything directly under REACH. I mean, this will be part of the discussion in the co-decision process. But indeed, whatever we do will be a substantial improvement compared to the current situation, where substances are assessed by independent contractors. We manage simply contracts in our unit, and I think already the fact that ECHA will be in charge, the European Chemical Agency, with as you have seen in Article 6, with proper committees in place, it will be much more professional in terms of restriction of substances. Then, of course, there are the 2 very important provisions on carbon threshold. Article 7 and Article 8, recycled content. Recycled content for us is very important because indeed it is a way to ensure the circularity, because if you want to ensure the circularity, recycling rates for many of these materials like cobalt, lithium, nickel, and graphite, they remain very low. So our idea has been always to, with recycled content, to promote the use of secondary raw materials. We are aware that especially the Parliament is proposing to increase some of these targets and also to anticipate the deadlines. Our view is that we should remain balanced, because indeed the industry will need some time to adapt. So that's the reason we have put forward, for example, for recycled content, a deadline in 2030 as a first deadline, because we are aware that industry needs time to adapt. And of course, and then we have all the second part of this proposal, Chapter 7, with all the provision on recycling efficiency and recovery rates, where indeed what we see in the co-decision process is that in particular the ENVI committee is pushing for much higher values. Sometimes it's a shift from 70% target to a 90% target. In our assessment, sometimes this is really at the edge of what is technically possible. So that's we already believe that the Commission proposal is already quite ambitious from that point of view. But indeed, I also would like to stress that on that chapter, we also regulated the second life of batteries, which is extremely important. So when you can actually use batteries for a second life for energy storage. This is also something completely new. Also very important, this is a clear message, especially to our friends of the Council. For us, what is also innovative about this proposal is not only the change from a directive to a regulation, that I would say that both Parliament and Council, they agree, but it's also the change of the legal basis, from an environmental legal basis to an internal market legal basis. Because indeed, if we really want to regulate the conditions for placing a product into the market, we have to make sure that these conditions are the same everywhere in Europe. So you may be aware that in the Council there is quite a lot of discussion on the environmental legal basis, or at least there are some member states which have proposed to change the legal basis, and others which they're saying, okay, but why we don't do a dual legal basis? The Commission, for the time being, remains of the view that the same level of high environmental protection, because indeed we're aiming at a very high level of environmental protection, can also be achieved with an internal market legal basis. This is actually the whole purpose of an internal market legal basis. And the last point also I want to draw your attention is that this proposal is also innovative from another point of view, which is the use of the digital passport. I mean, there has been a lot of talk about the digital passport, but this is the first ever legislative proposal where there is a specific article. Actually, there are two articles, 65 and 66, if I'm not wrong, where we regulated in details both the digital passport for batteries and the electronic interchange system. So I would say that always you can improve a proposal, but I think what came out from the Commission is already quite an innovative piece of legislation that, of course, can always be improved, but it already contains a very good structure. Of course, I just want to maybe mention that even when co-decision will be over, which will take still some time, but this is in the hands of the European Parliament and the Council, this is not the end of the story, because there are more than 30 pieces of secondary legislation between implementing acts and delegated acts which are foreseen in this legislation. So there will be plenty of work to be done after the adoption of this proposal. So it's a journey which is already, which has started, but the work ahead is still quite a lot.
Thank you very much, Mattia, for this quite, let's say, extensive overview. And I have certainly some question for you for the panel discussion, if you can stay with us for a few more minutes. And then I would like then to introduce our colleague Migle Bluzevice, which will talk for the industry, on the industry point of view, starting on some sustainability aspect for the circular economy. Migle, the floor is yours.
Hi, Claude. Hi, everybody. Immense honor to be here in such a distinguished panel. And perhaps without further ado, I'd like to say a few words and deliver a few messages on behalf of the industry. So we at BSF, and of course, together with all the Recharge members, we represent the entire value chain on battery production in Europe. Of course, Claude has taken care of making this statement already in the beginning. But what's really important is that we definitely welcome the measures in the proposed regulation that support the circularity of batteries placed in the EU markets. And of course, here I could speak about quite a few of them, namely the supply chain due diligence, carbon footprint, and of course the recycling targets. But in this intervention today, I'd actually like to focus on one of the key sustainability indicators in our view. And we've been actually calling for this as an industry. And of course, here I mean the mandatory carbon footprint requirement for batteries. So the proposed legislation, of course, aims at ensuring that customers could identify and choose batteries with lowest carbon footprint, right? Whereas we mostly consider CO2 measures when we talk about the first few stages of the battery life cycle, I believe that we should not forget that not only these new requirements in the battery regulation would incentivize the use of low carbon energy, more efficient process in battery manufacturing, but they will also encourage battery recycling. So for instance, the use of recycled materials in new batteries is definitely a very effective way on how to minimize the carbon footprint of these new batteries. So basically, by integrating already extracted materials into production of new cells and thus avoiding actually the mining and the processing of primary materials, which of course come with a very high CO2 footprint. So therefore, it's safe to say that the carbon footprint measures and battery regulation can be perceived as a very direct incentive for circular economy in the battery value chain. Now, when it comes to the market, we believe that CO2 measures actually will encourage market competition based on the CO2 performance classes. So you would have OEMs, so car makers, but also end customers favoring products with the best environmental profiles and therefore the best-in-class batteries. Be sure that that coincides with let's say, the changing values of the society, but to be sure that this works out as intended, we believe that the best-in-class performance categorization of batteries, complying with certain thresholds, should be accompanied by incentives for front runners. And we believe that the Article 7 on green public procurement already goes nicely in that direction, but surely more could be done. Now, it is also important that the carbon footprint measures are actually introduced as soon as possible to maximize the decarbonization potential of the battery chain in Europe. But not only soon, but also possible is a keyword here, as it is indeed important to get the secondary legislation right and allow, of course, the sufficient time for the development of the calculation methodology, of the performance classes, and establishing, of course, the set thresholds. And the last point that I'd like to make today is that in view of feasibility, batteries other than for electric vehicles and stationary energy storage systems should actually be excluded from the scope of carbon footprint requirements. Their applications are simply too diverse to establish proper category rules for the calculation methodology. And let's not forget that the administrative burden and cost on industry and authorities, by the way, has not really been assessed. At Recharge, we actually have developed a specific fact sheet for this purpose. It's a fact sheet on battery models to identify the impact of various sustainability measures, including the set carbon footprint, but also recycled content declaration. And the fact sheet actually clarifies that only the inclusion of EV batteries above 2 kWh and of course the energy storage systems, batteries would be a meaningful target as they cover more than 85% of the total weight of batteries included in the scope as proposed by the Commission. I'm sure that Claude and our research colleagues will soon circulate the fact sheet with you, so you can actually look at all of our convincing graphs and tables within. And of course, I could speak more and more, but for the sake of time, and I've noticed that Mr. Ertug also has arrived by now, I'd like to give back the floor to Claude. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Megle, for the nice intervention and introducing this new fact sheet that we will indeed circulate in the coming hours. And indeed, Mr. Ertug joined us. Thank you very much for joining us. And I know you have been very busy, busy time with the Parliament and the Council and the Commission at the moment. But we very much appreciate that you are joining us. And again, for this fourth event of Recharge and representing the Friends of the Battery of the Parliament group. And then I would like to give you the floor, if you are okay, to make some also not really introduction, but some battery statements on the view. On your view. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
So hello everybody, once again, thank you very much for joining this event. I guess it goes without saying that we as Friends of Batteries are happy, always happy to welcome and to organize these kind of gatherings. As a rapporteur for the TRAN of the battery regulation, I can tell you that we are really on the end of our negotiations. We will be able to conclude in a due time, and I think this is a good news to all of you when it comes to the battery regulation. And we all know that the heart of every battery is the battery cell, which also accounts for the largest share of value creation. And in the case of electric cars, this is up to 40%. And for the future of electromobility, the establishment of battery cell production in Germany and Europe, by the way, is therefore an important economic and industrial policy issue. The European Battery Alliance estimates, as you know, the market potential for automotive batteries produced in Europe at up to 250 billion euros by the middle of the next decade. 394,000 electric vehicles were newly registered on the German market in 2020 only, and this made us the second largest market worldwide, still behind China, but ahead of for the first time. What is also worth to raise is this already creates a huge demand for batteries, and Europe is currently experiencing a real boom in battery cell production. And the construction of several gigafactories is planned, and I think we all know the map of the different places throughout the European Union where the gigafactories are in planning. By 2025, battery cells for 7 to 8 million electric cars a year are to be produced in the EU, and making it EU to the second largest battery producer after China. Across Europe, around 100,000 new jobs should be created in the battery sector by 2030. And all these figures are, in my eyes, a big success for us as Europeans, and in particular for you as industry. And simultaneously, batteries for electric vehicle and renewables are predicted to drive up to the demand on lithium by almost 6,000% by 2050. And it's currently imported from Australia, Latin America, and China. This is, ladies and gentlemen, where I see a starting point for domestic battery manufacturers. Recycling of valuable and environmentally critical materials from batteries will be a key to a sustainable and competitive battery industry. And I guess this will be our chance to be in a due time leaders in that sector. And according to the Institute for Sustainable Futures, ISF at the University of Technology in Sydney, recycling and repurposing of batteries could reduce the global demand for lithium by 25% by 2040. This is a huge amount, 25%. And the figure for cobalt and nickel is 35%, and for copper, 55%. The European battery passport, in order to raise another issue with which the Commission wants to ensure that all batteries placed on the market in the EU are sustainable, recyclable, and safe, will contribute further to that goal. It's a good idea. Above all, ladies and gentlemen, reliability in battery production will be decisive in competition. And here, new production facilities in Europe and Germany have an advantage over manufacturers from the Far East if they can monitor production digitally without gaps. And with the new battery regulation, the EU plans, or we plan, to address new developments in the battery production, like an increased use of lithium and other shortcomings of the old battery directive. This was also subject of discussion within our negotiations, but in the end, I would say we have succeeded. We put this in our dossier. And with this robust legal framework and harmonized EU standards, I'm sure we can set standards for the successful battery industry in Europe. This is now a little overview of the situation right now, maybe an insight from the European Parliament's negotiating on the trans side of the battery regulation. And yeah, I'm very happy to be with you today, and I'm also open for some remarks or even criticism or questions. It's up to you, and I would welcome it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ertug. And indeed, it's a real pleasure to have you joining us, and with this very ambitious and optimistic view, I would say, about the development of the European battery industry. If you don't mind, we will ask you to participate in the panel, next panel session with the second part of this group, and certainly you may have some question from my colleague Patrick. And then I would like now we conclude this first review of the panelists of the first session with an intervention of Mr. Jan Tidgat, which is for Umicore, and which intend, of course, to again come back on the question of circularity, but also from the point of view of recycling. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claude. And thank you, Mr. Ertug, also for your support as a friend of the batteries. I can only confirm that we as Recharge and as Umicore, we share a lot of values with the friends of the batteries. And all the remarks I would like to make now are supporting, in fact, the objectives of the circular economy, and maybe suggestions also to improve it, and certainly not to water down some obligations or targets that are proposed in the batteries regulation, or the proposal for the battery regulation. In fact, my intervention could be summarized in just one word. It's about quality. And the quantity, the amount of recycling is in fact driven by collection rates and by the no leakage policy. So the collection rates, we can discuss on that, on how to calculate, how to make it representative, and how to make it correct in terms of what is available for collection and what is available or put on the market. There are a lot of discussions possible there, but we subscribe to the idea of collection rates, but also the no leakage policy. So that means that for large batteries, that you cannot put a figure on it, but you can really say all the batteries used have to return some way to recycling, and that drives the quantity of recycling. Whereas for the quality of recycling, we have some issues. Some people will say the quality of recycling is in fact set by the recycling efficiency targets and with the material recovery targets. And we are happy to see indeed the material recovery targets, which is a new concept which was not present in the current battery directive. And it says indeed, it gives a guidance to recyclers. Those are the most important elements to be recycled. So that's a good evolution. But if we then look to the details, we see still a focus on quantity of how much should be recycled and how much cobalt, nickel, and copper has to be recycled from the point of view of what's coming out, and coming into the recycling. But we do not see requirements on the quality of the material. And I would like to illustrate it with an example of lithium. If you would say to me, design a process where you have 95% recycling efficiency for lithium-ion batteries and a recovery rate for lithium of 95%, I can immediately give you a proposal or an answer to that. But then it will be downcycling, or even what they really call fake recycling. Downcycling means that I would produce a product in which the lithium is not suited anymore for batteries, but it is downcycled or downgraded to a quality that you can use it for road construction. And once it is there in the road construction material, then it's lost forever for the batteries, and it's not available anymore in a circular economy perspective to produce new batteries. But according to the rules of today, that would be perfectly fit as recycling, and you would have a high number. It's even worse if we look at fake recycling. That means that you have a product that obtains the status of end of waste, because according to the current rules, the recycling is finished when you achieve an end of waste status, but maybe the product still needs further refining before it is really entering into new batteries. And during that process, there's a lot of losses that are not even recovered in a product, that are really what is really called fake recycling. And I can give you examples where you could achieve officially 95% recycling of the lithium, but in fact, all the lithium is lost and not coming back in any material again. So I think that if we improve or make suggestions to improve the proposal from the Commission, it's not to get to a higher figure, but it's to define the quality of recycling. How can we make sure that the lithium that comes at the end of the recycling process is really going back into the batteries? The same for cobalt, the same for nickel. Yeah? How can we assure that? And then people will say, yeah, but we have the recycled content targets. So that means that the manufacturer has to ensure that there is a minimum recycled content in its batteries, and that will stimulate the quality of recycling. But the issue we see there is that it is better to put the quality requirements at the end of recycling rather than at the entrance for the new battery materials. And why? That's because all battery producers in Europe, and that means also the importers of batteries from China, from Korea, have to comply with recycling targets, and they will contribute to the price of recycling to the desired quality. So that's why we prefer to set the targets of quality of recycling at the end of recycling, rather than at the entrance of the battery materials production. But all in all, we are happy with the proposals from the Commission, but we would like to focus a bit more on the quality of recycling and how to ensure that the battery materials are really coming back into new batteries, instead of looking at how can we do more recycling. Because the easiest way to get to a higher figure is to give in on quality. And that's what we should not do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for this very, let's say, clear explanation on the benefit of good quality recycling. And then we have a few minutes for this panel. And we will, of course, start having some questions to our panelists, but please also online, don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat if you wish, because indeed we will have be happy to answer and speak some questions and answer, if possible, online during this panel session. So to start with, and thank you for having your video also open, and I will come back directly for the first question in the order of presentation we had today, coming to Mr. Mansouri. You mentioned indeed that circularity and safety should go together, and that safety has to be ensured. We heard about this very interesting discussion about the REACH regulation use for the batteries, or the creation of a specific chapter in the batteries regulation on this. From your point of view, it seems clearly that you have an understanding of the benefit to use REACH. I understood you had a paper or non-paper proposed to try to clarify some concern that we heard on the possibility to use REACH for the batteries regulation. Could you a little bit clarify and what benefit you see in this approach you are proposing?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Yeah, indeed, we have submitted a non-paper to try to identify maybe a third way to restrict all the substances, hazardous substances within the batteries ecosystem. The benefits for us, it's clearly the fact that we have to ensure coherence, but also consistency between all the legislation. When we are talking about the substance, either the substance is used within a batteries or in a product such as a table or a television or so on, we have to ensure a level playing field for all the sectors. Also, for REACH, it's very important to have that tool to ensure a level playing field between the primary and secondary materials. We don't have to duplicate so much the restriction process. We have one very future-proofed, very useful, and like which has demonstrate all the benefits because we have the REACH review who said that okay, the restriction process could be enhanced in some kind of way, but still this is still a very efficient way for the public authorities, but also for the sectors to promote substitution and also to ensure that hazardous substances are no more present in our products. The duplication, we have to avoid it, both for public authorities and also for the industries. Imagine we have just one product with several legislation, it would be impossible also for our customs authorities, but also for an economic operator. We have REACH. REACH is efficient, is the most effective way to ensure that hazardous substances are not more present in our products and everyday products. So please just use REACH as the best tool.
Thanks for this detailed explanation. Thank you very much to clarify the point. I would like to have another question about circularity, which is the topic of this first panel discussion. And we have just heard Jan explaining this benefit of quality of recycling. And then I would like to Mr. Pellegrini to maybe explain in his view, if we talk about circularity, and we know that in this batteries regulation, we have the recycling requirements, but we also have this recycled content added. So based on the previous discussions and feedbacks, why would the recycling quality not be sufficient to ensure circularity? Can you clarify what you see that recycled content would be more efficient or add for ensuring circularity from your point of view?
Yeah, so let me start by the recycling efficiency and the recovery rates. And indeed, I think what was explained by Yumiko, by Jan, I think it's pretty clear. This is the reason why we have proposed different numbers compared to the one which now they are contained in the draft MV report. So, and indeed, we have already put forward ambitious targets, but we are aware that if you push the bar too high, so which is a proposal of the MV committee to reach 90-95%, you may have a perverse effect of downcycling and actually reducing efficiency. So that is a concern that we have already expressed. But we also believe, to reply to your question, that actually this should be combined with recycled content, because indeed the two of them are essential components of our proposal. Recycled content is necessary in order to really make sure that in the new batteries generation, there will be cobalt, there will be lithium, there will be graphite, there will be nickel, which they come from secondary sources. You know better than me, I mean, that the Commission publish even a raw materials scoreboard regularly, where you can see that the recycling rates of these materials are extremely low. I mean, Umicore is one of the exceptions in the world. I mean, one of the few recyclers, but recycling rates for these materials are completely low when you compare with the metals. Of course, it's a matter of cost. We are fully aware of that. But we believe that there should be, so we believe that recycled content is a tool that the Commission, by the way, has already used in the SUP directive, in the single use. It's not the first time, by the way, and not only has been used in the single-use plastic directive, but we are getting data from recyclers that is functioning. So actually, I mean, in the SUP directive was about plastics, but when you look at the recycling of plastics in the SUP is going up as a result of this recycled content obligation. So we believe that the two things are complementary, so both of them are necessary. At least this has been our thinking in putting forward the proposal. Of course, we are aware that we have to make sure that there is sufficient recycled content in order to pivot in the new generation of batteries. That's the reason why our deadline is 2030, because indeed we don't want to arrive to a paradox situation where, for example, you may have more secondary raw materials in China or Korea, and then we need to start to import secondary raw materials from China and Korea to fulfill the EU obligation. That will be a paradox also from an environmental point of view. So that's the reason why we always said that we have to be careful in anticipating this deadline, because, and also in increasing that value, because indeed we need to see what is going to happen on the market. Knowing that other producers have started before Europe. That is also has been our logic for this recycled content, and why the target is only by 2030, because indeed, but also our estimates, they show that by 2030 there will be recycled content for three reasons. One, there will be a number of electric vehicles which have come to the end of their life. Two, you can still get lithium or cobalt and many other of the four substances for small electronics. There is full of small electronics into our homes. Of course, there are small quantities, but in terms of volumes, there is quite a lot of small electronics. And also, there is a third issue, which is that I don't know now the error rate, but when you produce a battery, you can actually, at a certain point, I've read that the error rate was 10%. Maybe now it's going down, but this 10% of batteries which are not fully functioning, which have to be cannot be placed into the market, at least we want to make sure that the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel, and the which are there are then recuperated. So,
thank you very much, Mr. Pellegrini, for this detailed explanation. And I note the balanced approach that you mentioned, which is a very important point for the industry. Time is flying. We have to be very short, but I would like anyway to have at least one question for our panelists. And Miguel, for example, you did mention in your talk about to help the circular economy creation in Europe. You mentioned about incentives to the producer. What could you be more specific and precise on this question?
Yeah, indeed, Claude. I'll try to make this short. When I said that basically the carbon footprint measures should really be supported by certain incentives for front runners, what I meant is that basically, you know, we as companies obviously put a lot of effort in really producing battery materials and then going through the chain, actually cells and batteries, which would fit the requirements for best in class. And sure, the regulation is designed in a very, very smart way. It would for sure increase the competition between the companies. You try to please your customer, and then it goes all the way to the end consumer, which is the EU citizen. But perhaps that is not enough. I did mention Article 7 about the green public procurement. That's definitely quite a good incentive. But I was also thinking, and maybe looking a little bit at our friend Adli from Belgium, looking also a little bit at the member states. So basically, what about certain direct subsidies? So already now there's quite a lot of help for customers when they buy electrical vehicles. So maybe also that could be used, let's say, to incentivize the purchase of when you look at cars, for instance, or general products with really the best in class category. Sure, we'll have more than class A or B, but really how to incentivize them to buy really, really the best in class, because possibly that would of course come with a higher price tag. So indeed, subsidies could be one way, but perhaps, if I may, to circle back the question to Mr. Adli as well, or to the Commission, it would be really, really interesting to hear your views on that.
Yes, one word maybe before we have to conclude, Mr. Pellegrini or Mr. Mazzari.
On my side, that would be telegraphic. You mentioned yourself, there is a clear, it's Article 71, if I'm not wrong, green public procurement. So and it's the first time again in the history of European legislation that green public procurement are made mandatory. So it's not, so by certain date, member states will have to allocate public procurement taking into account the provisions of Chapter 2. So sustainability requirements such as carbon threshold and recycle content. So for us, this is a clear way because, as you know, cars are bought by public institutions also as a fleet for the state. So that's for us is a very clear help for these efforts towards sustainability. As you know, in the taxation area, it's more for member states because for the Commission we need unanimity. So, and in any case, we couldn't do it in this proposal. But then, whether the member states they want to give additional incentives from a financial point of view, this is a national decision. Of course, it has to be in compliance with the European rules, including from a competition point of view.
Thank you very much for the feedback. So I'm sorry, we really have to rush now because we are already quite late for the second panel discussion, and I see Patrick is there ready to start. Sorry for missing some questions probably, but thank you again for this discussion about circularity. And then let's move now to a strong European battery industry. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very honored to be the moderator of this distinguished panel, and we shall be all together discussing on how to help create a strong European industry in this second session. I think, well, we have now, I think, quite established that the battery industry is going to be a key player for decarbonization of both industry and transportation. And I would like to note, as Mr. Ertug did a few minutes ago, that we have been witnessing in the past 2 years and this year also a huge increase in the amount of money that is being invested in the European battery industry. Nothing like what was happening a few years ago. Quite a change. So the European battery industry could become one of the largest battery industries on the planet, and possibly one of the most sustainable and innovative at the same time. But this is still a could. Today, if we look at the hard numbers, it seems, based on the statistics that industry has and that the Commission has and the governments have, that the European battery industry probably represents less than 5% of cells and batteries built worldwide. So quite a stretch to start from less than 5% and to reach the position that we believe we should have. So I would like to propose 3 targets to judge the success of our industry in the future, and maybe weigh the way that the proposed regulation could assist the battery industry in reaching those targets. Let me present those 3 targets. First of all, maybe we should judge ourselves as to whether we shall be able to bring the European battery industry in line with the positions of other EU industries have on the world stage, whether it be automobile manufacturing, airplane manufacturing, or train operations manufacturing, where we are quite successful in Europe. I think our goal should be to bring the battery industry on par with those 3 and maybe other industries on the world stage. And that could be one measure of success in the midterm. A second measure of success is to assess whether the legal framework that we're building today will be copied in the other areas of the planet. I'm talking here, of course, of North America and Southeast Asia. Will the legal framework that we're building here in Europe be copied in those other industrial areas, or will it be used against us to compete effectively and weaken our growth? That would be, I think, the second challenge. And the third challenge I think we should have in mind is to ensure that the framework which will be regulating our industry will be conducive to ensure agility of our sector. Agility meaning our ability to serve our customers well, or will it rather hamper and stifle innovation? I think these are three criteria that we should have in mind when assessing our success in the midterm, whether this is 2030, 2035, hard to tell, but we have to look in those directions, in this horizon, with these three directions in mind, three ways to evaluate in mind. Now, this being said, when looking at the proposal as it is today, and also at some of the changes that are being proposed by the Parliament, the different committees of the Parliament, and the discussions that are ongoing in the Council, there are two provisions that I would like to briefly discuss, which are quite pivotal to setting the European standard, but could be either helpful or not so helpful to reach those three targets that I identified. One was already discussed briefly by my colleague, Migle, which is the carbon footprint calculation. And the other one are the performance and durability criteria that are introduced in the proposed regulation. When it comes to carbon footprint calculation, which has been, as I said, developed quite extensively by Migle, I would just like to add one little remark. We had last year, and I do this with a little image. Last year we had the Olympics in Tokyo. Next year we shall have the Olympics in Beijing. For those of us who like sports, which is my case, when I watched the Tokyo Olympics, I was very interested to watch the athletics events. In the athletic events where people run and jump and throw, I counted that there are 45 different events, from 100 meters dash to the marathon, to throwing the discus or throwing the javelin, long jump, high jump, triple jump, hurdles, relay. They're altogether 45 events. When we shall be building the performance and durability requirements as well as the carbon footprint, we must remember that for industrial batteries, it is just like with athletes doing athletics. They all are built and trained and designed to perform very differently. There is not a one-size-fits-all measurement of performance for all these different athletes, for all these different industrial batteries that can properly assess their performance. Each category, each event must be measured for what it is. So we are a little bit concerned that it will be impossible or very, very difficult for the carbon footprint calculation and the performance and durability requirement to properly capture the complexity of all these 45 subcategories, and there are actually more subcategories in industrial batteries. The second statement, or the second point I'd like to briefly highlight, is more specific to performance and durability in itself. This industry is still rather immature in the sense that a lot of novelties are in the process of being and will be introduced in the coming years when it comes to design and hence performance. So it is probably not quite yet the time to over tightly regulate performance and hence design, because they could actually hamper agility of the industry. And when it comes again to EV batteries here and to industrial batteries, we think that when it comes to performance and durability, it is the discussion between the suppliers and the OEMs, the industries that select the batteries. It is those discussions between those two parties and the obligations, the expectations of the OEMs that will actually help push the performance and durability requirements of these products rather than strict regulation, which could actually hamper more than facilitate proper design of batteries. With this, I will stop here, and I would like to introduce the first participants to this second session. And I would like to start with introducing Mr. Antonius Manders, who is the rapporteur of the batteries regulation in the IMCO committee from the Netherlands, EPP. And we have a message from Mr. Manders, which I would like you to play. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me on the fourth roundtable of the Research Battery for EU. It's so important to create an independent battery industry within the EU. That's why I introduced high standards for environment, social standards, but also technical standards. All the companies who do business within the EU have also to comply with these higher standards. That's then that we export our values, our European values, but also to create a level playing field for you. To help you to implement the new regulation, we proposed to install in every member state a battery competence center. Battery competence centers are together the governments, the industry and the universities to be sure that we have the economy, the legislation and the knowledge together, the expertise. It's sometimes possible that there will be a dispute in cross-border problems. These disputes I want to be part of an EU binding arbitration procedure. That means that the EU battery competence, if there is a dispute, you can go there and within 3 months you will have a ruling which is arbitration, which means that then there is a legal situation, a legal status quo. If one of the parties doesn't agree, the ECG procedures is always open for that because that's legally binded by the treaty. So we have always to keep this open, but we want to have in advance a legal situation which help you to continue your business. That's a new issue, and I hope that the Council will support this too, and you of course. With creating an independent battery industry within the EU, we are always also protecting the existing industries, for example, the car industry, the garden devices industry, all kinds of electric devices, because they are all produced together with batteries which are hopefully produced within the EU. If we are not having an independent industry for batteries, then at the end it might be possible that we have to buy only electric cars in Asia. And that's what I want to avoid. I want to protect the European industries, but in a global open market, but especially with a level playing field for European industries. It cannot be the case that we have environmental obligations within the EU, that we have social obligations within the EU, and that then competitors are coming with their products without any obligations in their home state and then put their products on the market with low prices so that we cannot compete at the end. A level playing field is the most important thing for you because the European industry is the most strongest in the world, but we need a fair competition. And that's what I'm fighting for.
Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Manders for his video, for a short video. And of course, we shall not be asking questions to Mr. Manders today. That would be a bit unfair to him, I think, a bit difficult for him to answer. I would like now to introduce Juni Nissinen. Juni Nissinen is a senior specialist with the Finnish Ministry of the Environment. Will you take the floor now?
Yes, thank you. I assume you can all hear me.
We can hear you very well, and we can also see you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. So, dear parliamentarians and colleagues, thank you for inviting me to share my views to the battery regulation proposal, again, sometime after the previous Batteries for EU discussion. But as before, let me start my remarks by emphasizing that what I'm saying here are reflections of the national views but not necessarily always strictly the Finnish position. We have a genuinely participatory system of EU position making in Finland, which means that the national parliament is given the right of way to outline the baseline of the national position, which is then followed by ministers and civil servants alike. So in my intervention, I try to follow these lines, but Finland can definitely not be held accountable for my words, as you certainly understand. You are all probably quite well aware of the negotiation situation of the battery regulation proposal among the member states. So I'm not going there in detail, but I can say that last Friday we submitted our comments to the Slovenian presidency on the revised version #1 of the regulation proposal. Mostly, I can say that our comments were short, concise, and concrete, as we are in general quite happy about the direction of developments of the file. But we do believe that some points require further discussion, clarifications, and better understanding among the member states. I think it cannot be news to anyone that the views and positions of the member states differ, depending on the national, industrial, and environmental starting points. This will probably lead into a compromise text that is not as ambitious as it could be and as we would hope, and there might be some defects in the text. However, I have understood that the European Parliament is making ambitious proposals to improve the draft regulation. So I'm looking forward to those and hope that they help us in completing a truly sustainable basis for a battery industry in the EU. From our point of view, some of the key issues in this revision cycle are, firstly, the inclusion of light means of transport batteries category into the regulation, with necessary changes in the text, including carbon footprint assessment, at least for bigger LMT batteries, and tailor-made recycling targets and information requirements. Secondly, chemicals and hazardous materials restrictions and REACH are still up for discussion, but can hopefully be clarified in our upcoming discussions still in December. Lastly, a functioning due diligence chapter is certainly required. As a country with battery-related mining industry, we consider it essential. However, there are still open questions vis-à-vis the scope of the due diligence regulation, whether it should be extended to all the batteries and to the whole life cycle of batteries. As far as I know, this is possibly one of the issues that will come quite strongly forward from the Parliament, and I welcome it if it happens. Of course, we are also looking forward to the revised Chapter 7 on producer responsibility, because we think that there are some essential elements that need to be there for the producer responsibility system to function properly. From the Finnish point of view, there have been views that the new regulation proposal should give stronger support to a sustainable raw material basis and sustainable mining. Concretely, this could mean, just as an example, that the EU would only use battery raw materials with a documented origin. It could also mean that the EU would not, for the time being, accept battery materials from deep sea mining until it has been scientifically proven that it does not cause widespread permanent damage. This just as an example, not as a Finnish position. Also, I have previously pointed out that the proposal does not address the biodiversity footprint of batteries. It mostly concentrates on climate impacts. However, I must admit that we are still not sure whether and how these concerns could be reflected in the proposed regulation. So that is still a question mark. We share the view that it is important that the regulation is flexible enough to allow the battery technology to develop in a most efficient way. We cannot know how the battery industry develops in the next 10 years, even if the lithium-ion batteries dominate our discussion now. We need to keep in mind that we are making legislation for a sustainable future. Thank you, and may I already wish everybody a wonderful Christmas and end of the year season.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nissinen, for your remarks and for highlighting the points of interest for Finland and for yourself. I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Emma Wu Nolte. Ms. Nolte is Environment Counselor at the permanent representation of Sweden in Brussels. Ms. Woenolte, the floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Demetz. First, just a sound check. I see you nodding, so I assume that you hear me well.
Yes, we hear you quite well, and we see you too.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to all distinguished participants, and good afternoon, colleagues. So entering this discussion based on a Swedish government perspective, I must, like Adli and Joni from the Belgium and the Finnish representatives, also make a disclaimer that we are, from a Swedish point of view, analyzing the proposal. And what I will say this afternoon is in a way a full presentation of the Swedish position. But still, coming from that perspective, the question of creating a strong European batteries industry is very much linked to the times we live in. And here I want to come back to the frame of the necessary green transition we are facing, where the electrification of society is imperative for the achievement of our climate goals, but also for a circular economy. Sustainable batteries will here be a key. They will be crucial for the electrification, but we also need to make sure that the green transition is fossil-free, non-toxic and circular. So therefore, we are very much welcoming sustainability requirements in what the Commission has proposed in the regulation. So in creating this change, we obviously need a strong European batteries industry. In electrifying our societies and shifting towards sustainable products and batteries, how can we create then the right conditions for a strong batteries industry? And I will try to stick to 3 points. The first one would be that from a Swedish point of view, our interest has been from the start that we need harmonized requirements for batteries in the entire EU. Only in that way, a level playing field and a protection of environment and health can be ensured. And therefore, the proposed legislation is the right way forward as we see it. Secondly, we need high environmental and climate ambitions. I want the proposal and the legislation we have in the end to be ambitious. That will be realized more easily with the sustainable requirements, and we are convinced that a push for carbon footprint declaration, increased recycling and use of secondary raw materials will strengthen the EU as a competitive leader in green batteries. On those requirements, I think that both my Finnish and Belgian colleagues have raised important points where we share, maybe not all, but several of them. So I will not go into those again, but raise my third point, which would be legal certainty. From our perspective, we think that we need as legislators to decide as soon as possible, finding a well-balanced text, of course, so that requirements and expectations becomes clear and predictable for the different actors involved. And that also includes to avoid the overlapping and contradictory provisions across legislation. We also share several of the concerns that Adli from Belgium raised on the REACH and the relation to the REACH. And then to relate to what Joni said, having a legislation that's technique neutral, that allows innovation and future development is also a key for us. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening, and Recharge, thank you for inviting to this occasion and for bringing us all involved in our different roles together. I will have to leave in a minute, but wish you fruitful and continued discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Woenolte. I understand that you will not be able to stay with us much longer, but so I thank you very much to have taken the time. I would now like to give the floor to Mr. James Copping. Mr. James Copping. Mr. Copping is Policy Officer, Mobility within DG Grow of the European Commission. Mr. Kopping, the floor is yours now.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this event. I'm going to give a perspective of the industrial policy. You've heard from Mattia about the legislative proposal, so this is a look at some of the other things that the European Commission is doing. Creating a strong battery industry in Europe is, of course, a major collective effort. Given the scale of investment required to move almost from scratch 4 or 5 years ago in terms of mass production of batteries, we have needed a major effort from all the stakeholders involved. You need the political agreement and consensus that we support for this industry, an industry that is willing to make the substantial and sustained investments required, member states and regions willing to support this process, and an EU that can establish a framework to underpin the development of this industry, and in particular help create a genuine EU single market for batteries. Well, I'm glad to say that there's now near universal agreement that the greatest collective challenge facing the world today is tackling climate change. Batteries are the key enabling technology to achieve the EU's overall objective of achieving climate neutrality by 2050. So there's no doubt that this is a strategic industry. And we also have a rapidly emerging battery industry that's willing to make the investments needed, not just to produce batteries in the short term, but to invest in the next generation of batteries, where the future competitiveness of this sector depends. Member states have also been quick to support this effort, as witnessed by the 12 member states that are directly supporting battery projects in the 2 battery important projects of common European interest. And there are plenty of other battery-related projects outside these consortia as well. However, I'd like just to focus more on what the EU is doing in addition to the legislation to support this process. At the heart of this driving EU policy is the European Battery Alliance, which was established in 2017 by Vice President Šefčovič, then Vice President for the Energy Union in the European Commission, with the objective to ensure that Europe would have its own competitive, innovative, and sustainable battery value chain. The aim was to ensure that Europe would have a key stake in the global marketplace for batteries. So to reassure Patrick that at least from the Commission's point of view, there is a global view on this, on supporting the industry, though of course we need to get it firmly established in the EU first. The Commission's objective was not to dictate to the industry and to member states what type of batteries should be produced and where, but to establish a framework that would allow the innovative genius of our industry to flourish and to help member states and regions to support them. Since 2018, when a European Strategic Action Plan for batteries was adopted, following discussion with member states and industry, the Commission has established a number of initiatives to create this framework. Of course, one of the most important and the one that will have the most profound long-term effect is the legislation that we've already discussed and will, I'm sure, continue to discuss. But that's a key part of the policy. But in addition, we have areas such as research and innovation. We may be the current technology in batteries may well be a significant competition in particular from the Asian countries, but it's the future generation of batteries that where we see in Europe we have a chance to really establish a competitive edge. Under the last framework program, we had 270 million euros awarded for 40 batteries, 40 different projects. Under the Horizon Europe, there's been a dramatic increase in the ambition, with nearly 1 billion of funding available and supported by a new battery partnership with industry to support research projects all along the value chain. And the first call proposals for this was in June this year. Another key issue is the question of skills. To a certain extent, the battery industry is a victim of its own success. With the rapid growth, we have not seen the same rapid growth in the number of skilled employees available to recruit. So this is a key issue, and we don't want the lack of skilled employees to be a bottleneck on growth. And so the Commission has launched the Erasmus Blueprint Skills program for batteries, all BATS, to identify skill needs and strategies to meet them. This has also been supplemented by an Automotive Skills Pact launch in November 2020, which looks at broader automotive skills issues, but including batteries, which has begun to launch regional pilot projects to tackle local skilling and reskilling needs. And in addition, we have InnoEnergy's Battery Academy program to develop, to implement retraining immediately in regional programs and pilots. And there are already 3 of those up and running in the EU. Raw materials we've heard about is a critical issue. We've adopted the critical raw materials list, and which contains a number of battery materials on there. We have the European Raw Materials Alliance has also been launched, and we've been developing projects in line with that to increase the supply of raw materials. Building on the support for projects, as I mentioned earlier, we have the 2 large battery consortia established under the state aid instrument of the Important Projects of Common European Interest, which are helping to develop the pan-European links across the EU to develop these battery projects so that we really get an EU benefit from this effort. Really, just to cut my comments short, I think the key role for the European Commission, but also in Parliament, Council, European Investment Bank and others, is really to provide the catalyst for the market on which the industry can build. And I think in the area of batteries, this has been, in most areas, a remarkable success story. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kopping, for reviewing the whole scope of the Commission's programs and assistance and support. I'd like, in the interest of time, we need to move on rather quickly, though. So I'd like to give the floor now to Mr. Sebastian Röhler. Mr. Röhler is the Manager of Product Compliance with Varta Micro Battery out of Germany. Sebastian, the floor is now yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claude. Thank you, Patrick, for the invitation and for giving us European battery manufacturer and also cell manufacturer for giving us the opportunity to speak about the opportunities and also the challenges that are coming with the battery regulation. Mr. Ertug has already given a few numbers. I would like to underline some of them again in order to underline the importance of what we are talking here about. So since the creation of the European Battery Alliance in 2017, we have had about a dozen European-based gigafactories that have been announced. And according to the European Battery Alliance, the European battery market is estimated at 250 billion euros from 2025 onwards. Some 800,000 new jobs are expected to be created in the whole battery value chain in Europe by 2023 alone. And from this perspective, we really welcome the Commission's proposal, which aims at setting a European framework to support this new industrial dynamic. However, of course, we need to ensure that the proposed measures do not disproportionately benefit non-European value chain actors and set back European efforts to create a battery ecosystem and undermining the investments that have already been made in the European battery value chain and in its infrastructure. The battery manufacturing relies on a very secure supply of primary and secondary raw materials. And in the battery regulation, this has already been pointed out by the speakers earlier, we have the Article 8, which is regulating recycled content in batteries. The aim of this is to boost the quality recycling and to trigger the market demand for secondary raw materials. However, In Asia, we have a lot of battery waste available, including production scrap. There are significant volumes available, and it's easier for Asian companies, of course, to access these recycled battery materials. The volumes of available secondary raw materials in Europe are, of course, much lower, and the recycled content obligation would jeopardize the competitiveness of European batteries and battery manufacturers. In the next 10 to 15 years, a recycled content obligation will steepen the EU dependency on third country raw materials. It would benefit for non-European battery manufacturers disproportionately, and it is more burdensome to implement and to enforce and to verify the high quality of recovered materials, just like Jan has already pointed out earlier. There is even another thing which can become very worse for battery manufacturers. So if we have a shortage of these secondary materials in Europe, this could also cause production stops, and it would force the European manufacturers to source secondary raw materials just from outside Europe, just like Mr. Pellegrini has already pointed out. It will again disproportionately benefit imports of batteries from non-European countries where higher volumes of battery waste is already available. There is another amendment that has already been proposed, which will make the situation even worse. And this will happen if the scope of Article 8 will also be extended to other types of batteries. So having said this, there are two proposals from Richard's point of view. So first of all, we would like to limit the scope of Article 8 to batteries for electric vehicles and only large NOC storage systems, and also to establish the recycled content obligation on a voluntary basis first. Let me give you another example. Batteries are already part of many electronic products of our daily life, and the end users are identifying the quality of these products not only based on their performance, but also on their capability to support a sustainable life. As a consequence, we, the battery manufacturers, are already receiving a lot of requirements from the OEMs and the device makers that clearly focus on making batteries sustainable. Just one example. We have been asked to produce carbon neutral in the first step and to make our products totally carbon neutral in the second step. We are working with our partners, with the whole battery value chains on concepts how to achieve this. Manufacturers of entertainment devices and also automotive OEMs have already asked us to implement the 5 steps of the OECD due diligence guidance in our supply chain. We have integrated these requirements into our management systems and are acting accordingly. Fulfillment of these requirements is regularly checked by third parties on behalf of our customers. None of these requirements was based on the law. They were totally voluntarily, and they are requested by the market and implemented accordingly. As a European-based company, we have understood the importance of sustainability and are putting a lot of motivation and effort into achieving these ambitious targets. However, the addition of regulatory requirements, such as the recycled content target, would force us to draw our focus from these self-set targets to other regulatory-based targets and would slow down the progress that we are making at the moment. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you, Sebastian. In the interest of time, I'm going to speed up transition, and I would like now to call on the panel Sophie Tricot. Sophie is Director of Communications, Sustainability and Public Affairs for 4C Power. Sophie, the floor is yours. Sophie, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was saying. Good afternoon, and thanks, Patrick. Well, I'll try to make it quick because we're running out of time, but I think we have some important points to cover here. Well, you reminded it, Patrick, in your introduction, Mr. Ertug, in the first session, Europe shall become the second largest manufacturer of lithium-ion cells by 2024. Just to remind a few figures, it means that we're going to be growing the global production capacity from almost 6% in 2019 to about 15% in 2024, and this will keep growing to reach about 17% by 2029. So it's quite a major increase and also a major opportunity for our industry to do this right together. And Patrick, you highlighted it. One of the major points for these battery rules is that they really need to be fit for purpose, so we can enable the strong battery ecosystems. We need to be then able to lead and set strong sustainability standards towards global users of the batteries. And we must also encourage and advance our European battery industry. So if those new rules are fit for purpose, they're agile, then we will have a winning industry, and it will benefit the European economy and also the action towards climate change. So with this in mind, there are maybe a few points that I want to highlight today, maybe to challenge and advance a little bit the proposals that were made. First, looking at retroactivity, that's something really we would like to see clarified, because it may bring a bit of ambiguity and then impact the market. Also, if you look at it from a sustainable standpoint, we want to encourage a long period of usage for appliances, for vehicles. So we must ensure that manufacturers will be able to offer and place on the market spare parts for appliances and equipments that are already in use today. So retroactivity is really a key point as part of the Article 1, and this is why we would like to see a grandfather clause included in Article 1. Then, looking at technical feasibility, well, if you want the new rules to be working, it needs to be feasible from a technical standpoint. And well, for some batteries included in Article 14, for example, the feasibility is not possible just because there's no BMS included, and you cannot access the state of health information, for example. Also, they're not suitable for second life. So, for example, those are safety-related batteries, medical batteries. And also looking at lead or nickel-based battery chemistries, they cannot meet the state of health requirement. Also because of an absence of a BMS. This is why in Article 14 we're asking to exclude chemistries other than lithium batteries, and also to remain applicable. We're asking to limit these to the batteries with large energy storage systems and electric vehicles, not the very small batteries. Well, then looking at the carbon footprint and social responsibility for the new rules, we're very excited at Recharge that this is taken into account, and we've been actively demanding this and expecting this. So we're very happy with the carbon footprint calculation and also the due diligence requirements. Just maybe 2 points on the due diligence. Well, of course, we're calling for mandatory requirements, very transparent tracing when it comes to the batteries. And if we really want to be a game changer here, we really believe that in Article 39, we must extend the due diligence to the manufacturing process. Because of the very high imports of cells and modules, this will be a key point, and we should ensure that there's a strong scrutiny on this. Also, maybe a little clarification on the scope for the Article 9. It should apply to all battery models produced in series, and here it's very important because we don't want to slow down innovation and for example, the production of prototypes within Europe. So the produced in series scope is really something that we see very important as part of the Article 39. Well, I guess I will stop here for today, and I hope it's helping to clarify our position at Recharge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tricot. Claude, do you want to take the floor back?
Yes, thank you, Patrick. Indeed, I have to say we are quite late. We are already over time, and I'm very sorry we may have not so much time for questions because our invited person and participant may have other appointments as well. So I believe here we had no enough time to have questions for the second sessions, but I would like anyway to give a big thank to everybody and conclude in a few seconds. Particularly, I would like to make thanks, Patrick, for the second part and all the speakers. We noted a number of very interesting points, like level playing field, harmonized approach in regulation, strong legal base, a number of very important points that we completely support. But as you have understood, we also see that there are room for improvement in this new regulation. And we wish, of course, that these discussions now ongoing with the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission to take the well-balanced approach that we heard about. With this, I hope you get some nice insights on our views on this way to secure a responsible and leading European battery sector. And we hope that we will have, let's say, a good also follow-up on these discussions. Recharge will, of course, continue its activity in preparing this regulation for future. Thank you all, and with this, we will have to stop because we are already over time. Bye-bye all, and final thanks.
Thank you very much, Claude. Thank you to everyone. Goodbye.